I want to tell you a story. And it's a story of something we did, and it's a story where I was in charge of this transformation, so anything that went badly is my fault. Anything that went well is everybody else's good work, I think. And I work today for Canon Medical as a global healthcare IT manager. I look after R&D strategy. But in the period of time that we're talking about here today, I was head of engineering in our Edinburgh Research and Development Group. So I'm talking about a period of time from 2015 through to about 2018, and you can see a little bit of the timeline of the Edinburgh group there. The important thing to remember is that we're part of a genuinely global R&D group. All our R&D teams work with teams in other parts of the organization. So you can see our Japan-centered R&D group with R&D in Europe, America, China, Japan. And the engineers in our group very regularly are working with teams in other places. They're also very regularly getting to eat lovely food in other countries, which is a bonus to the process and something we all like to do. This is important in the story I'm going to tell, because these teams have very strong bonds with another team in another country that they work quite closely with to take a technology that we develop in Edinburgh and embed it into something like a CT scanner or an MR scanner or an ultrasound scanner. And thinking back to talks from earlier today, our product life cycle is long, and we can't really avoid it being long, because even from the date that someone buys a new CT scanner, it's a €1 million piece of equipment at least, there's a construction project to put it into a hospital, there's an 18-month finance buying cycle. So something completely new in terms of features that gets rolled out through a CT scanner is probably going to be 2 years from when you develop and test it and say it's ready to when customers are actually using it. So I want to talk a little bit about what was happening in 2015. So in 2015, this is typically what one of our engineering projects would look like. So this is me here in the leadership team up the top. Didn't mean to magnify myself quite to that size, but there we go. And I, along with the other parts of the leadership team, will work quite closely with project sponsors in Japan. Now, those are the people who decide how much money we get for our R&D projects. So they commission statements of work, and we deliver projects according to them. Then we have, at the lower level, we have agile teams who are working on these projects, and they're working very closely with a team, usually in Japan, where there's a project coordinator. So that agile team works very closely day to day with the corresponding team elsewhere. But ultimately, we get our requirements from the person who is paying the money. They define the business value. And in 2015, this wasn't working quite as well as we wanted to. To go back to Andy's talk, I think that we had tools, we had structure, but there was a mismatch between our culture and our structure. And if we look at how we did feedback on our projects, the circle on the left is the rolled-up management view of how our projects are doing. So we would send a whole questionnaire survey to our project coordinators, the person in the Agile team in Japan, and ask how the project was doing, delivering against timescales, were they delivering the features that they said they would. A number of metrics go into that. And then we roll up our total group of projects across this Edinburgh group, and the ones that are excellent, exceeding expectations, are green. The ones that are doing okay are blue. So you would think that's pretty good. We weren't at that time doing the same thing with the sponsors, who are, after all, the people who give us the money to do these projects. And when we did it informally, we found that there was a significant proportion of projects that they weren't actually happy with. And we really wanted to dig into why that was, because our structures and processes shouldn't have led us to that. And what we found was that the Agile team was highly optimizing locally for their friend in Japan who they work with every day, optimizing for that project coordinator. And the communication between the project coordinator And the sponsor in Japan, who's giving us all the money, was not good. We don't even today know exactly how that communication there worked. But as a leadership team, we were not delivering the value that the company wanted us to do, even though the projects were delivering at this level. And when we started to look at it, it wasn't a question of, is each Agile team doing the right thing? It was a question of, how do these Agile teams work together? How do we get organizational alignment? How do we get each of these teams to care about what the team across the hall from them that's working on something related, or what a team in America is working on? And in fact, instead, we got this, right? The project team only cared about their goals. But why? Why was it like this? We strongly believed the structures didn't cause this problem, so we decided that we should look at the culture aspect. Were the teams driving things with the right values to lead us to the kind of results we wanted? And we felt that this came down to a clash between values and culture. At this point, we don't really have any evidence. We're observing this, and ideally, we want to do an experiment. How do you measure culture? We didn't know how you measured culture. And then we had a conversation with the Scottish government. They quite like us because we bring lots of engineering work to Scotland, and we employ people and so on. And they said, would you like 15,000 euros to do some training? I mean, do you know anyone who can do an analysis on culture? And they said, well, we've got this big database of consultants, and we think we probably do. And they introduced us to this guy, Doogie. Now, Doogie is the least like any management consultant that I have ever met anywhere else. Doogie was a steel worker in the shipyards who went into doing agile training consultancy and culture training consultancy. He was blunt, to the point, would swear at you, and he was just the breath of fresh air that we needed. But he also came with a set of tools. So the first tool is one from Human Synergistics, which is a tool for measuring the culture of your organization. And there's a lot of detail in this, but I just want to look at the colors primarily. So if your organization is aggressive, punishing failure, very direct and critical and unrealistic, then you would be strongly red on this scale. If your organization is more like, well, government bureaucracies, very defensive, that's not my job, mate. That kind of attitude, you'd be strongly green. And if your organization is very humanistic, supporting each other, encouraging co-working, you would be strongly blue. So what we did was we ran this test, this survey, with our staff, and we ran it twice. The first time we ran it, the one on the left, is the organization that they said they wanted to work in. So you can see the top. We only ran that one with 28 people, because generally people in an organization are fairly consistent about what they want. We then ran it with... We asked the whole group to complete it, which is about 110 people. We got 89 replies, which I think is not bad. It's certainly enough to draw some conclusions from. And actually, compared to some organizations, it's not bad. We don't have any massive spikes of red or green, but clearly we would want more blue. We would want to be more like the way the employees said they wanted to be, which is great, right? The whole team wants to work this way. We can help them do that. The interesting thing, though, is that one red spike is being oppositional, challenging. And what happens to a bunch of creative people if you put them in a structure they don't like? They challenge and become confrontational. And that can be a good thing if everything else is positive and affirming. So they said, we want to keep that. We want to keep holding you to account, keep challenging you, keep pushing. But everything else, let's move this blue up quite a lot. So that's the first part of the process. We've measured our culture. We have a measure of the culture. We then, from that, you get a list of, see, something's come along and thrown me right off my track, which is exactly what happened to us in 2016. We started this process in November 2015. And in round about then, leading on to early 2016, we were Toshiba Medical at that point, and Toshiba became part of a huge global accounting scandal. And as part of that, they decided they would take their most profitable business division, which was medical, and they would sell it to Canon. So suddenly, in the middle of us trying to do this change, just a couple of months in, we'd gathered the data, but we hadn't done anything with it yet. We're now in a situation where we're being told to cut 10% of our budget and close down 2 projects. So at this point, unfortunately, we did have to lose some people. That had never been our intention with our change process, but since every time I tell people about change processes and culture, they say you can't do it without firing people, I have to own up to the fact that we did actually fire a few people in this period, but not because of the culture. But what we did do is we looked at the social and leadership skills of the people we were considering so that we focused on keeping the people we thought would be most constructive to changing the culture. It wasn't a big change. It was about 7 people out of 120 across the whole group, including the non-engineering functions, but it did throw a bump in the road. So, getting past some of that initial bump, we start to look at these behaviors, and from that circumflex we draw, you also get a report which suggests some behaviors that you want to look at. Now, there's no point in an organization looking at what management thinks you should do about these behaviors, because management is about as far from the problem as you can possibly get. So what we did was we sent out invitations to everyone from sort of senior engineer level and up to come and join in this process. And what Doogie said to us is, don't force anyone to do this. Just send out the invitations and see who comes. That will become relevant because we had 2 leaders, and one of them took that approach. He just said, this process is happening. If you're interested, go join in. The other leader in the other engineering department said, this is too important not to get involved in, guys. I would like a bunch of you to get involved. Volunteer yourselves, but it's important. We really want to do this. He didn't specifically push any individual to do it, but there was a lot more emphasis behind his request to get involved. So, what does this look like? Well, I've got about 16 slides that look like this, and I'm only going to show you one of them. This is one of the boards that the engineers working on this change process drew. So what they have is a list of themes, and under each theme they have what does it currently look like and what we like it to look like. I'm going to pick out one of those, or 2 that tie together, really. One of the things that the engineering leads were saying through this process was they didn't like having to delegate important work to other people in their teams or to someone in another team, because then they were taking a risk it would fail. So they kept all the highly important jobs to themselves as much as possible. And that's partly because this is their attitude to risk. They felt, are you feeling lucky, punk? And they felt that they couldn't. Our culture did not allow them to take the risk to delegate tasks to other people in the way that they would normally want to do. And we looked at this and thought, that's really something we have to change. We have to give the people in our company the space to be able to take risks, to be able to fail, to be able to engage. And we had thought we were doing that. But clearly they didn't think we were doing that because they're drawing pictures of little men with guns to their heads on the board, right? So this is just one, and we have all 10 of these. We had a picture of what does this look like? What would you like it to look like? How would the organization look like if we had that one large wedge of blue that you all said you wanted? And essentially, this is the process that we followed. So we've started by engaging the entire organization in a conversation about what the culture is and what we want the culture to be. Next is the hard part, because if I want Joe, my engineering lead, to be prepared to take more risks, the first thing I have to do is I have to be prepared to take more risks. I have to let him see that I'm prepared to take more risks and role model the behavior that I want to do. His department manager needs to take more risks and delegate more and be prepared to do all the things that we're trying to tell Joe is the right thing to do. So we have to role model top down. So we've done two things here. We've gathered information bottom up, and then we start to role model the behaviors that everyone has said they want from the top down to show everyone that change is okay. Because there is this fear that change will get them into trouble, their performance metrics will suffer, etc. And then going through this whole process, every stage we're measuring the effect on culture, the effect on productivity. We started measuring our sponsor feedback as well as our stakeholder feedback to see how it went. And something interesting happened. So this is our overall 2017, just over 2 years after we did the first Circumflex measurement. This is how we changed the culture of the entire group, so over 100 engineers. And you can see it's not a massive change. It's about a 20% change if you add it up numerically. But there is more blue consistently. There's a little bit less red, and there's quite a bit less green. And this is really the start, right? We're after that, particularly because we've had a big blip, and then we're coming back from it. And the first measurement is before we've laid some people off, something we've never done before. And the second one is a year and a bit after that. What gets interesting, though, is when we start looking at those two groups I mentioned separately and looking at how this culture affects the performance of those groups. So group one, this is the group whose engineering lead encouraged people to go and get involved in the change process. Nobody was forced. They were encouraged. And look at the difference. A lot more blue. This one measures out at a 38% change in culture. The group where the manager didn't push people, I think, was personally less invested and interested as well. They actually went backwards over the same period. My guess would be, and we didn't measure this, is that they saw other teams' working environments getting better and theirs weren't, and this reflected in their own culture getting worse. But we didn't, as I said, we didn't measure that. What we can do, though, is we can start looking at the feedback that those two different groups got. So again, these are aggregated. There's about 7 or 8 teams in each group. So the top line is the project coordinator feedback, the thing we were measuring before. And in this first group that engaged with the culture change process, there's continual improvement over that period. We just look at the green, which is the percentage of projects that the coordinator is rating as excellent. There's continual growth throughout the period. If we look at the sponsor feedback, again, there's continual growth in the green. There is a little blip of red in there. There's a couple of things the sponsor's not happy about. I'll come back to that. Group 2, they didn't engage with the cultural feedback so well. What happened to their performance? Well, it slid back a little bit. Maybe stayed about the same as far as the coordinators are concerned. Excuse me. But the feedback from the sponsors, the people who are paying for this, definitely was backtracking a bit. And there's a big red spike in here of projects they're not happy with. So why is there a red spike? One of the things that we had to do to take risks as a leadership team to enable our team members to take risks was to go to those sponsors and say, we're going to commit to less work over this next period in order to give our team space to improve how they perform and deliver in future. And these indicators are done at the end of a period, so they lag about 6 months. So you can see that about 6 months in the first part of the period, some of the project sponsors are saying, hang on, I'm getting less than I was before. But then it improves as they realize they're not getting less than they did before, they're just committing less than they did before. So now the teams have enough slack and capacity to actually work on their culture, work on their performance, and improve, and they rank up from there. If we look at the two teams together as a little bit of a summary, Group 1 improved culture-wise. We measured at 38% improvement, and we see improvement both at coordinator and sponsor level. Group 2 went backwards, and it stayed flat or went backwards a little bit. But the thing that really tells me that this was a success is that as soon as we shared these results with the teams, that second group said, I don't care what my manager says, we want to do what they're doing. This is just so much better than what we're doing today. They're getting less pressure and getting more work done. Why can we not do that? So overall, I mean, this was the beginning of a process. This is the bit that we measured from 2015 to the start of 2018, where we looked at that single change. It was the only big change we were making in our organizational culture, process, structure at that time. So by accident, we got a control group that didn't really engage, while one group did, and we can see the impact that culture made on performance. And we held back on making some of these other changes until we could see that and measure that and understand what the impact of that was. We've gone on from there to capture some of that information into a set of values that employees wrote, and are now shared with new employees during the recruitment process so they understand what kind of company we are. A big thing that came out of it was that our staff felt they wanted to be treated like adults, and we had far too many HR processes that said, you will do this, you will not do this. They didn't feel like they were being treated like adults, and our HR manager essentially grabbed the book HR Disrupted, which is fantastic if you've not read it, and deleted about 80% of our HR processes over a 6-month period. Because we just assume that our staff are adults and will do the sensible and right thing. And what do you know? They do. No one takes advantage. Everyone appreciates that they're being treated like grown-ups and moves on. We've stopped using the Circumflex to track because it's a slow process, slow feedback. So, we were seeing change over a 2-year period using that. We're now using Office Vibe, which does a sort of employee net promoter score, gives you a feeling of whether your employees would recommend you as a good place to work. We're doing that team by team on a week-by-week basis. They get slightly different questions and emails every week, and that allows us to keep a sort of track of how happy and how aligned with culture individual teams are, and that's helping us to continue this process. And pretty much at the request of the teams, we've introduced OKRs and KPIs to help them show what their performance is to their Japanese colleagues, to their American colleagues. So that's pretty much my story. I hope that I've managed to show you that you can, if you engage, firstly by having a conversation with your whole organization, and then by role modeling from the top, you can change your organizational culture. And that if you change your culture positively, you will see differences in performance of your teams as well. Thank you very much.